you've already broke 2 in like 10 minutes.
Well, there's probably a chance I won't. Okay, maybe there was a chance I was going to break all 3 of them. We also got this handy little tool. Yes, I'm pretty pleased with that. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. For those of you that might be new here, we are working through a restoration of a 1968 Playmore Model 140. We started earlier this year. We're working away on the inside, but it's starting to get cold again and it's starting to feel a lot like Christmas. So with that in mind, we thought we'd talk about some of the tools it takes to work on doing a remodel of one of these. This was partly brought about by a question that was in one of the vintage trailer restoration groups that we're in on Facebook. What are some must-have tools that I need to use to restore my 62 Oasis that I can put on my Christmas list or other must-haves? Let me just look at a few of the comments. Tape measure, Dremel tool, oscillating tool, 2 of everything, gasoline and match, patience. Damn, man. Okay, we're done. That's a good one. A lot of cash. Anyway, what we're going to talk about first is some of the tools that we think you should definitely have if you're going to tackle a rebuild of one of these things. I mean, let's call this the 10 tools that you need, the 10 plus tools that you need to restore a vintage camper. 10 plus. You're definitely going to need more. So let's talk a little bit about what you're going to need to demolish one of these to begin with. One thing I would definitely recommend to get before you start demolishing one is to get a pry bar. You're going to be pulling a lot of nails, prying apart pieces of wood, and you're going to need something to wedge in there, push down on, and pop it loose. I'm not going to say you're going to need a sledgehammer or a sawzall or anything other than that much to get into one of these, but the pry bar for sure. And you're definitely going to need some pliers because the sheet metal is always stapled on. You're going to be pulling a ton of those, you know, some screwdrivers to get under there and hook them out, or even those little paint scrapers with the little pointy end. Those work pretty well. But other than those tools, taking them apart is pretty straightforward. You know, you've got a drill to take some screws and some bolts out, but other than that, there was nothing that fancy. One thing you might need, some of the bolts on the frame definitely get rusty. You might want to get a grinder to cut through some of those rusty bolts and pop them out that way. You're also going to maybe want that grinder to clean up the frame, to grind off some old rust. I certainly use one for it, you know, and grinders are cheap. I mean, you can get one for 20 bucks and away you go. You might want to spend a little more on it, but it's not something that's going to be overly expensive. Okay, so when it comes to rebuilding one of these, there's quite a bit of wood that goes into them, and so you're going to be cutting a lot. Number one saw that I recommend everybody has before they tackle a project like this is a miter saw. It lets you cut things at an angle, lets you chop your framing to length. They're just tremendously useful and make a quick job out of something that needs to be reasonably precise. Doesn't have to be the most fancy compound miter saw that you've ever seen. You don't really need a little laser guide on it or anything. A good basic one is the most important thing there. The second most important saw that I would really recommend everybody get is a table saw. Partly because if you have to just go and buy wood at the hardware store, you're limited to what sizes they actually have. And some of the smaller sizes tend to be pretty terrible. You can wind up with some really warped, really knotty wood, just junk. So what I used my table saw for a lot on this project was taking 2x4s and cutting them down to size to make my framing out of, and that way I was able to have a much higher quality framing and I don't know, maybe even save some money. So if you don't want to get a table saw, I understand, you know, they take up space and you know, you don't need the biggest, heaviest duty table saw. Just a simple job site, you know, will work. But if you don't want to get a table saw, because I know they are kind of scary to use, they're one of the more dangerous tools in the shop, a circular saw can do a lot of it, but you're going to have to work a little harder to be accurate with it. Now I did use a circular saw on this project as well, because it's hard to cross-cut a big sheet of plywood on a table saw, and it's actually kind of dangerous to do that. Certainly don't do it by yourself. But the circular saw was really useful for that. So I would probably pick one up. Again, they're not that expensive, and they definitely have their uses for cutting paneling for sure. Another saw that's really important on these projects is a jigsaw. You use them a lot for cutting little notches and things where you can't fit another saw, and you know, to fit like a big panel around something else. The other thing you're going to use it a lot is cutting these end pieces where they have curves on them. You know, if you have a camper that's all straight lines, you might not need one. Still be handy to have one, but you could certainly do it without. If you didn't have these curves to cut, you know, and you just had some notches to make, another saw that would be really useful, and I tend to call them the mistake corrector, but the Sonocrafter. It's a little oscillating tool. You can use it to make plunge cuts, notches. Yeah, I find that a lot of times if I get something in place and it's a little bit off, I can use the Sonocrafter to go back and just trim off just a tiny bit and correct a mistake. Another tool that I got on this project, and I didn't really think it was super useful, but was the trim router. You probably don't need a full-size router, but a little small handheld trim router, super useful, turns out. I used it to, once we had the paneling on the walls, I used it to cut all the way around it to make you know, everything match. Worked beautifully. I used it to cut out the window openings, cut out the fronts on the cabinets. It was perfect. I actually am always trying to think of other projects to use it for.
Now I'm gone.
Oh, are you okay?
Man, that was, thank God it didn't go through my hand. It hit me right there in the hand. My hand's got calluses on it.
Safety first, kids. So let's talk air tools for a second. One thing I've said before in our videos is that a good compressor is worth you know, its weight in gold on a project like this. You're going to need a stapler, you're going to need a nail gun, and you're going to need a sprayer to get a nice painted finish on these. And a compressor will help you with all of those. Now, if you just have a little pancake compressor, those are great for, you know, airing up tires and stuff, and even a small nail gun works fine in those. And if that's all you have, you can use a sprayer, but don't get a very large sprayer, which of course also means it's going to take a lot longer to paint. But if you don't have a compressor, I would get a 30-gallon one, air-cooled, doesn't have to be oil-cooled. You're not looking for the most fanciest, highest dollar professional, you know, compressor out there. But something about 30 gallons, you can get even the most basic sprayer that they sell at Home Depot work beautifully on this. So, number one, get a compressor. Number two, get your air tools. You're also going to need a stapler to put the skin back on. And we also used it for, you know, those gussets we did. We used it to secure the paneling to the walls. So we used it quite a bit. You're also going to probably want a little like 18 gauge nail gun. I use that to do the trim work and several other things in there on the cabinets, and they work great for that. And then of course that sprayer. Now you could get an electric stapler, you could get an electric nail gun, and you can get an electric sprayer. And I've used all of those before, and I kind of like the air tools. Typically, air tools do tend to be a little less expensive than an electric counterpart because you're letting the air do the work. You don't need a motor in there or anything like that. So, up to you. But you know, yeah, I would definitely consider air tools over electrics. Okay, so those are kind of your big tools that, you know, I would definitely have to tackle one of these projects. Other things that I really would recommend, get a ton of clamps. You know, you can get the cheap bar clamps at you know, Harbor Freight. They're like $3 or $4 a piece. Just buy a ton of them. You're going to use a lot of them potentially on a project like this. Also, what turned out to be really useful are those little 90-degree clamps I had. Those are just framing clamps. They're not anything special. The one of many tools that I don't have, that I really do wish I had, is a Craig jig. And we'll see. Fingers crossed. Maybe Santa Claus will bring me one this year. But those would replace, like when we did all the gussets on it, we would use the Craig jig in place of those. And those let you drill pilot holes to toenail screws in very accurately, so you don't have to worry about things shifting. Cabinet makers use them a lot. I've seen a lot of people doing campers use them, and they do look really useful. They're a little pricey, but I think they would be worth the money when we do another one of these in the future. So the last thing I'll say, the one indispensable tool that allowed me to do this as efficiently as I was able to, was using SketchUp. It's a free program, and you can make a very detailed 3D model of everything that you're doing. It's better than making a bunch of chicken scratches on a piece of paper, although I do recommend that as well. Get some of those little blue and red pencils that you sharpen on both ends. Those are great for making drawings and making notes when you're taking it apart, and then also when you're putting it back together. But if you take those really detailed notes when you take it apart, you go to SketchUp, you build that 3D model, you always have that reference. You can come back, and you can also plan kind of how and see how things came apart, how they were put together, so that when you go and put things back together, you're able to do so with intent and purpose, and do it quickly and hopefully correctly. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found some useful information in this. Thanks for following along this week. You know, go back and review those earlier videos of ours. You can see a lot of this, a lot of what I talked about today in action, and in action maybe. But I'm going to take my cutoff tool, and I'm going to try to cut all the way down it. That took a long time. I don't recommend it. But yeah. It's really fun to work on one of these. If you like to work with your hands, it's a fun project, and hopefully at the end you get to go camping, right? Thanks for tuning in. New videos come out every Sunday, so make sure and like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next week.